Okay, next up is Christian Decker, and he's going to talk about the Lightning Network.
Nobody ever heard about Lightning, right? So, thank you. So just to get an idea, how many of you are actually more into the Ethereum side, and how many of you are more into the Bitcoin side? Let's start the war right here. So yes, my name is Christian Decker. I am a software engineer at Blockstream. I work on Lightning, both the specification as well as our C-Lightning implementation, and we have a great collaboration with Async and Lightning Labs and a few others. So it's a really nice place to work at. And I will basically be concentrating on the core innovation that enabled payment channels in the first place, namely the update mechanisms that we use to change our mind over and over and over again, and basically just update our off-chain state without having the ability to then reverse whatever we decided, right? Okay, before we get started, let's take a look at the good old on-chain days. What some people would still like to be true today. And this gives me the opportunity to introduce some of the animations are not working. Good. That's not good. So it gives me a bit of the opportunity to introduce some nomenclature and my funny pictures because they will show up all the time. So the round parts are basically, those are outputs, basically just values and spending conditions that need to be satisfied for somebody to spend these values. The squares are basically just are the transactions, and the red dots are nothing else than the scripts, namely the conditions that we set up for these values to be spent, and the scripts that we use to satisfy these spends. Okay, so that's rather annoying that the animations don't work. Shall I switch to my notebook? Would that work? No, I send a Google slide. Okay, cool. So in the good old on-chain days, we would, if I were to buy coffee, and I'm a huge coffee fan, so much so that I've been called a coffee compiler before, I would create a transaction, basically taking my 5 bitcoins on the left side and reassigning these 5 bitcoins into 1 bitcoin to the coffee shop and 4 bitcoins back to me. It's my change. And once I created this transaction, I would send this transaction into the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network would forward this transaction internally until everybody knew about this transaction, and then I would wait. I would wait for a confirmation. My coffee would get cold, and I would get annoyed. Okay, but eventually the transaction gets confirmed. I get my coffee. Luckily, I ordered an iced coffee, so being cold is not that bad. And all of this took somewhere in between 10 to 30 minutes. And all the while, I was standing at the point of sale and basically tapping my fingers and waiting for my coffee. Okay. So how can we improve this? How can we build off-chain protocols in such a way that these are immediate payments? They are microscopic in comparison to what on-chain payments are possible, and how can we make them even more private? If not as private as we would like right now, but there's always space to improve, right? Okay. Imagine you didn't see the right-hand side. Okay. So basically, we have 2 participants in this off-chain protocol. Let's call them Alice, Bob, and Carol is another participant that is not participating in our channel. This is basically the materialized view of what the blockchain sees, right? It has Alice, Bob, and Carol with associated balances. And what we do now is basically we lock these two values in so that neither of us can modify them unilaterally. And then we go off-chain. Off-chain basically means that we start to negotiate a set of contracts of the blockchain, each of them basically saying, hey, if once we close, these are the final balances that should be enforced. And as you can see, there are multiple of these, meaning that we can renegotiate this over and over and over again, basically at the same speed that we can communicate. Now, once we're done, we basically take the latest one of these states, which are represented internally as transactions, so that every single one of us always has the ability to enforce our agreements. We take this latest state, we reapply it to the ledger, and basically unlock the values that we had locked before, and basically settling our channel. Now, the core difficulty we have with payment channels, and this is true for every single payment channel, be it payment channels or state channels or off-chain protocols, every time we negotiate and renegotiate a state change, we have this problem that both participants, or all participants in the case of a multi-party channel, all participants always have still have the old states, right? So how can we ensure that that the other nodes cannot go to the blockchain and say, hey, see this state that I got like 100 iterations ago? This is the latest. Please enforce. So we need a mechanism to invalidate old states and make them unenforceable on the blockchain. And in the rest of the talk, I will basically present 3 of them. I skipped the one that I invented a few years ago because that's now obsolete. But before we go there, let's quickly see why. And this is the only sales slide I have in the whole deck, I promise. There's basically three big sides to this. The first one is obviously scalability. I mean, that's what we were all promised, and what all of us want out of it, right? We can have more than, yeah.
Do you want to have a break for 1 minute and then we can go on to animations?
That would be great. Yeah.
Would that be better?
Yeah.
Okay. If we just hold on for that.
Yep. Any questions? Yes, sorry about that. Yes.
What do you prefer, Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Litecoin. EOS.
What about the US Constitution?
I can find out for you.
Be helpful for the Litecoin for later.
Oh, and is there any questions, I guess? We could do one question while we wait.
They haven't seen anything yet, so there's little they can't ask questions. Yes.
Okay, so basically, like a lot of people they like to do finding someone something by accident, like they state in someone have like this thing, like the first person can find. I'm quite not agree with that approach. What do you think about like to have like better like economic and like the balance to decide like if people submit the wrong like receipt.
So the question is whether we should penalize people for submitting an old state. You just reinvented Lightning. That's exactly what Lightning does. If you publish an old state, you actually get punished, and you're.
Why people should penalize? I think maybe like not so robust to penalize people who have like system down.
Yes. So that's one part that I have in the last mechanism. Because penalizing is not that nice, especially because it's quite easy to make missteps. So yes, we'll come to that. Good. Thank you so much. So yeah, I was talking about scalability. Scalability obviously is the big one. We all want to have our micropayments, our payments be as quick as possible. We want to have as many as we want. Anybody heard about IoT, this newfangled thing? Yeah, people tend to like micropayments for that. We have true real-time payments because we actually settle at the same speed that we communicate at. Privacy, it's not as good as we thought, but hey, there's people working on this, so that's good. That was on the end-to-end privacy where we have multiple hops. But simply the fact that we do not publish the intermediate states every single individual payment, but we submit an aggregate of the intermediate payments, that already hides quite a lot of our activity. There is no way for us to data mine the blockchain anymore to find out individual payments. We only have aggregates of payments in there. And of course, permissionless innovation. It's really hard to get changes into Bitcoin and into Ethereum exactly because it's a global consensus. So if we lift our protocols off the blockchain, we don't need to push every single change through the entire consensus. And we can innovate really quickly and do some really nice quick turnaround on innovation. Okay. So let's get to the update mechanisms. The update mechanisms I will present are three. The first one is the easiest one that everybody probably knows. It's the Spielman and the Spielman construction. So what we basically do is we have an initial output owned by one of the two parties. In this case, it's 5 Bitcoins by the green participant. We create a transaction that creates an output that is shared between the two parties, meaning that both parties need to sign to any transaction that spends it. And we create a settlement transaction that basically refunds the green node the entirety of its funds, and the blue node does not get any part of it. The blue would actually be dropped because it's 0. And at this point, all of this is still off-chain. This has not been submitted to the Bitcoin network. But as soon as the green participant sees this transaction, it can add his signature, and it is sure that the only option that these 5 Bitcoins have are to return to itself if he signs the funding transaction. So what he does is basically he signs the funding transaction and he broadcasts it into the network. And this is basically the channel being set up, right? We have now put the funds into a multi-sig address in which you no longer can decide unilaterally how to spend these funds. And now we can start negotiating. The half-signed transaction, which is missing the blue signature, is handed to both parties. And the blue party can now decide, okay, I can add my signature, or I can just put it in my back pocket and wait if maybe he comes back and gives me some more money. And indeed, after a while, the green participant buys a coffee, basically, now incrementing the balance of the blue node, decrementing the balance of the green node, and adding his signature. Now, the blue node has two transactions in his hand, right? One transaction that gives him 0 Bitcoin and the other one that gives him 1 Bitcoin. Which one do you think he will choose? Probably the one that gives him 1. So he throws away the old one and just keeps the most recent one. And we can do that a number of times until eventually the green node either runs out of money or we decide, hey, I'm moving away, I'm not buying coffee from you anymore, let's settle this. And at this point, we basically, the blue node adds his own signature and broadcasts the settlement transaction. And at this point, the channel is closed. So the Bitcoin blockchain basically has seen the first transaction and the last transaction. All the intermediate steps have been aggregated and rolled up into the last transaction. So, does anybody see a problem with this? It's perfect, right? Done. Good. Now, the problem obviously is that, this replacement is only incentive-based. Why does the blue node choose the later transaction rather than the one before? It's because he gets a bigger share of the money, right? So this makes the channel inherently unidirectional. Because if I were to send money back, then the blue node would still have a transaction in his hand to enforce the higher amount to him, and he's the only one who can add the second signature, so he would always choose the one that gives him more money. Good. Haven't finished that one yet. Thanks. The next construction is a truly bidirectional construction, which actually solves this problem in an elegant, if complicated way. And it's the lightning penalty mechanism. So what we have here, and you've seen that the drawing moved out quite a lot to the left side because we need all the space. So what we have on the left side is, again, we have the setup transaction, which creates our shared multisig output, which we use as a basis for our channel. We have confirmed it, and now we want to negotiate on how to split these funds. Notice that I put a timeline on the bottom, so we're moving from left to right as time progresses. So what we do first is basically we split this whole space into two parts. This is a part that the blue node knows, and this is a part which the green node knows. This is because the information we are about to share is quite asymmetric, and each of us holds a different set of transactions to enforce the latest state. What we do then is we create two identical transactions, both splitting the amounts into 4 and 1, 4 and 1. And notice that this is basically the output that goes to the blue node itself, and the green output on the top is the green output that goes to the green node itself. Okay, still easy. Now we want to update this, and we want to change this into a different split, namely 2 and 3. And now we are in the situation where we have two different states, namely the 4 and 1 and the 2 and 3, which are both valid. Now we somehow need to make sure that we can no longer enforce the first state, right? So what we do is basically we hand the green node a transaction that spends the blue's output and basically grabs the funds. And this is basically done by poisoning this transaction. If this transaction ever leaks into the blockchain, then the misbehaving node, namely the one that tried to enforce an old state, has poisoned himself and given away his funds. Under the hood, this is done using a hash pre-image or a signature, basically saying that, hey, I'm okay with you stealing my money if I ever publish this transaction. Yeah. And so what we then do is we just repeat this game over and over again, and we always invalidate the old state by giving our opponent basically the means to kill us if we misbehave. And we can do that forever. Now the interesting part here is that that this is truly becoming a bidirectional channel, because we just increased the amount of the blue node, and then we still incremented that. Should have changed that. But we can actually send money back and forth now without fearing that that somebody might enforce an old state. Now this is not exactly true. These outputs here, namely the ones that get stolen if I misbehave, those have a timeout attached to it. Namely, this is the timeout that I give my counterparty in order to react to my misbehavior before I can run away with my money. We need this timeout because if my counterparty were to disappear, then there would be no way for me to grab my money back without going through this. And so what we usually do is basically as soon as the poison transaction or these commitment transactions here, as soon as they are published, a timeout starts to tick of about 24 hours. And if inside of these 24 hours you've not presented any evidence of me cheating, I'm allowed to get my money, right? Okay. So this is lightning penalty, and it's, I find it rather cumbersome because it has all of this asymmetry and poisoning and stuff. So what I did was basically we came up with a new update mechanism. Because why not? That's what we do, right? So this is L2. We've published this a month and a half ago, I think. And it's based on an earlier research I did during my PhD called Duplex micropayment channels. And it does away with a few of the ugly details, but it also requires a change in Bitcoin. So not exactly sure if we can make that happen yet. Okay. But the general construction is we again use a setup transaction to create our shared account. We confirm that on the blockchain, and now we start the negotiations. What we do is basically we have, from this shared account, we attach a settlement transaction onto it that has a timeout attached to it. So if nothing else happens after this timeout, we can attach the settlement transaction and basically settle the channel. Now, what happens if before this timeout triggers, we attach another transaction called an update transaction? This update transaction basically replaces the settlement transaction, creates a new multisig output, and allows us to attach a new settlement transaction. So we just replaced this settlement transaction without any exchange of secret information, no shotguns, no poison. This is all just by using the transaction structure on the Bitcoin blockchain. And if we want to do another update, we basically just do the same again. We invalidate this transaction by double spending it here. This can be done because this branch is only valid after a certain amount of time. We can always attach a new update. And we can do that quite a few times. Now, does anybody see an issue with this? It's expensive. We're still creating an update transaction for every single update. So I wouldn't want to do this. Because we're still bombarding the blockchain with all of these update transactions. They're single input, single output, but they're still there. So what we came up with is a mechanism in which we can take basically this update transaction and rebind it to any of the prior outputs without invalidating any signatures. And that basically is what we do here. Should we want to settle this transaction, we rebind this update to the original output, and we have basically a setup transaction, an update transaction, and a settlement, and we've just skipped all of the in-between updates. Now, if an adversary were to publish the update 1 transaction and we're at update 3, then I could just take update 3 and rewire it to update 1. So even if our adversary manages to put an update transaction that we replaced into the blockchain, we still have the opportunity to replace to sort of override the effects that would have been desired by the attacker, basically making publishing an old update meaningless. Now this still has the issue that eventually this becomes valid. So if we're not online to rebind a later update transaction to the output, we might be able to settle a settlement transaction that was replaced. But this is just recreating the Lightning penalty downsides, right? And this is much easier, but it also requires SIG hash no input, which is basically the mechanism we use for this rewiring. Okay. Just 10 seconds about the Lightning Stack. What I've just told you is basically a small part of the entire Lightning network. We have Duplex micropayment channels, NL penalty, and L2 all at the same layer of this stack. But we also have the multi-hop Sphinx layer. We have the transfer layer in HTLCs, and we have a lot of framing and negotiation in there as well as gossiping. So this is a huge ecosystem. There's lots of fun to be had. Join us. And I'll skip the last few slides. They're basically just about HTLCs and the Onion network, but happy to take questions.
That's fantastic. We have, yep, one question. There you go.
Hi. Thanks. Can you go back a few slides to the last one of the last one you were talking about?
Yeah.
Because I hadn't heard this before. I think that's a really cool idea to hook in each update to all of the previous ones. And it's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that before. But in this one, can't I still call publish settle naught after update 3's gone out? So that settle naught transaction is alive forever unless you hook it into that one as well.
Well, I mean the point here is that if we attach update 3 to it, and got update 3 confirmed, then this output no longer exists because we double spent it. So settlement 0 cannot be confirmed.
But you're doing that off chain, right? So we've got to 3 off chain.
Yes.
But settle 0 is something that I can publish at any point.
Nope. That's not exactly true because
after the timeout.
There is this timeout, and so we'd have to attach this to the update.
So you're limiting the length of the channel by the timeout period in settle 0.
That's true. In this picture, yes.
Yeah.
We can prepend a trigger transaction that makes this indefinite.
Okay.
Basically, we have the setup transaction, a trigger transaction that sort of starts all of these timers.
Yeah.
And only when the trigger transaction makes it onto the blockchain, we can attach updates to it.
Okay. So and then if you maliciously post update 1, you can post the delta from update 1 to update 3 immediately afterwards. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yes. If update 1 makes it in, I can attach update 3, and there's no later update. So
and you can't get in the gap. I can't publish update 1 and then immediately make another transaction and move those coins away.
Nope, because the only transactions that may attach to these to the update outputs are other updates or the settlements. Yes.
Yep. Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
So the conditions for the spend are actually that it's just those two.
Yeah, so if you guys have any other questions, we can catch Christian afterwards.
Oh, I'm running away now.
Are you running now?
No, it's okay. I'm still around, and please, questions anytime.
Awesome, thank you guys. Another round of applause, that was awesome. I really enjoyed that.